We're interviewing on the Hamilton College campus today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Frank Foster with me, most noted arranger, composer, saxophonist. Welcome to the college.
Thank you very much.
Real pleasure to have you here for a couple days, and I've been looking forward to talking to you again because we actually did this in early '95.
That's right.
I know your career has taken a different path since then.
Definitely.
How's life after the Basie Orchestra?
Well, it's busier than ever, and it's even beginning to pay more.
No kidding. I'm really glad to hear that.
I don't like to talk about financial aspects so soon, but that just happens to be one phenomenon.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that quite a bit because you said some interesting things about that earlier in the jazz history class. Do you get most of your income, is it kind of divided between performing and writing?
Well, right now it's divided between performing and publishing. And the writing is a minimal part of it, the actual writing.
Oh.
For instance, I am commissioned now and then by the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band under the direction of John Faddis to write an arrangement for a presentation that they do at Carnegie Hall or somewhere. And that will consist of 1 or 2 arrangements at a time. And then there will be no more writing, actual writing for pay for another few months or a few weeks. I'm doing a lot of writing that's for myself, for my 3 groups, the non-electric company quartet, the 10-piece dance band called Swing Plus, and the big band called the Loud Minority. But all that's just, that have to do that on my own time.
Right.
But the one growing part of my business, so to speak, is publishing, especially publishing the charts that were done during the Basie era from 1953 to 1964, and the so-called Basie Heritage era between 1986 and 1995. And I'm getting lots of orders for, mostly for the older charts. So that's a part of the business picking up, and that's what's going to have to support us.
Do you have kept ownership of all those arrangements over the years?
I've kept ownership of the arrangements, if not the songs. I don't own any of the songs from that period. Oh, yes, I do. I'm sorry. I own about 2 or 3 of them. But the most notable, like Shiny Stockings and the 4, 5, 6, and most of the others that were recorded on the roulette, I don't own the compositions, but I do own the arrangements. And all the songs that were published between 1986 and 95, I own the copyrights on all those.
That's good. Something you'll have forever.
Definitely.
Well, you're a self-described big band bebopper, I think you said before. And bop made a huge kind of impact on you as a young man. Did you start off playing in high school, kind of the normal, introduced to an ear instrument in junior high or whatever?
Well, I started off actually before my junior high years. My involvement was not with the school at all. Just the years, the junior high years, I was performing on a, I guess you could say, a semi-professional basis from age 13. I actually started playing at age 11, and by age 17, well, my senior year in high school, I had my own 12-piece band, but hardly any of my musical activities were connected with the school. I wasn't in the school band or the school orchestra, and there was just so much going on outside of the school with seasoned professionals, you know, twice my age, most of them, and that was very.
You can't get any better schooling than that.
That's right. Great schooling and great
Was
fun.
this in Cincinnati?
Cincinnati, yes.
What was the musical atmosphere that was going on that was made gigs so available?
Well, that was during the dance band era. There were lots of dances, that mostly dances. There were and some nightclub gigs, like for small combos, but lots of dances by the big bands. And those were all the gigs.
Mm-hmm.
Concerts hadn't started to be a thing as yet. So I played with three local big bands before I formed my own band in high school, and I played for senior proms and things like that, and other little public dances. And the scene in Cincinnati, the musical scene overall, was very good at the time. There were some great musicians that were from Cincinnati, and there was a place called the Cotton Club, which was the main nightclub venue where they had shows, productions. Then there was a dance hall called the Coliseum, where all the prominent big bands came through every Sunday. So each Sunday there was a different big band, from Erskine Hawkins to Duke Ellington to Stan Kenton to Tony Pastor, Count Basie. And that's where I saw a good many of the big bands. And there was another place called the Topper Ballroom. It was the first place I saw Lionel Hampton's band. And these were of course, dance halls. And they were great because all the big bands came through.
Were you yourself a dancer?
No.
You didn't like to dance?
I didn't like to dance, couldn't dance, wasn't worried about it. I had a girlfriend, I'd take her to dance, I'd turn her loose to dance with whomever she wanted to while I stood in front of the band the whole time.
You were a stand in front of the band guy. It doesn't surprise me at all. So you saw some of the great saxophone sections come through there?
Yes, Benny Carter had oh my goodness. He had a lead alto player named Porter Kilbert, who was almost as ferocious as he himself was. And of course, the great Duke Ellington had Johnny Hodges and Otto Hardwick and Harry Carney. And of course, the Basie saxophone section with Earl Warren, Tab Smith, Don Bias, or Buddy Tate, and Lester Young.
Yeah. So you got to hear Lester in the Basie band?
Yes.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I liked Buddy Tate more at the time.
He was a very strong kind of Texas tenor sound, right?
Typical strong Texas tenor, yeah.
Did you ever, in those days, aspire to be in those bands?
I did. I aspired to be in Count Basie's band at the age of 16 or 17. But I also wanted to be in Dizzy Gillespie's band.
Yeah.
And I auditioned for Billy Eckstine's band with a gentleman who was later to be together with me in the Count Basie Orchestra, Bud Johnson, the late Bud Johnson. When I attended this dance, Billy Eckstine's band, Billy asked Bud to let me use his horn to play, and Bud, most musicians don't like to have other musicians blow their horns, but he very unwillingly consented, and I played a few little bebop licks for Billy, and I didn't become associated with Billy Eckstine until years later. But I wanted to be in Eckstine's band, Dizzy's band, but I wanted mostly to be in Count Basie's band.
What was your first exposure to music of the big band era? Was through records and or
through
radio?
recordings, and especially introduced to me by my older brother. I had a brother who was 6 years my senior, so when I was 8, he was 14, and he had me listen to the bands from 8 years old on. And when he was 17, I guess I was, however, 6 years younger. And he had me listen to, especially to Count Basie, Jimmy Lunsford, and Duke Ellington. And I zeroed in on those three, most particularly on Count Basie. and I just became a big band
Yeah.
nut.
But somewhere along the line, the bop came into the picture.
Yes.
And this was like, as you described before, like it snatched you.
Around August of 1945, I heard Now's the Time in Billy's Mounts for the first time, and Charlie Parker for the first time. And from that moment forward, it was all over. I was a confirmed bebopper. And the idols that I had worshipped up to that time, Johnny Hodges, Willie Smith, and Benny Carter, sort of fell by the wayside. And it wasn't until years later, when I was already in my 20s, that I looked back and began to appreciate about what I had originally liked about them.
Mm-hmm.
Because as one matures, one realizes that it's all good.
Yeah. You don't have to replace the old with the new.
Right,
You can
exactly.
listen to both of them.
Exactly.
Were you tempted to become an alto player when you heard Parker, or did you?
Well, I was already an alto
You
player.
were an alto player.
I started out as an
Okay.
alto saxophonist
Uh-huh.
in my own band, the bands I played with in Cincinnati, the local bands.
see.
My own band in high school, and up until about my second year of college. And I switched to tenor because we had an overabundance of alto players, and we needed a tenor saxophonist. And so I switched to tenor, and it got to be fun. I was enjoying it like a brand new toy. So I said, well, hey, I'm going to stick with this. This is fun.
Yeah. Can you, before we get out of your high school days, can you remember what your own band would have charged for, let's say, a high school prom?
Let's see. There were 12 members. I think a maximum of about $30.
For the whole band?
Right, $30, which means that I would make about $3 to $5, and the rest of the band would make $2 a piece.
Uh-huh. Doesn't seem like much nowadays, but you were probably glad to do it back then, right?
Held in 1946, that was pretty good.
Yeah. That's
For a bunch
great.
of kids, you know.
Yeah, sure, sure. And where did you get the arrangements for that kind of group?
I wrote them
You
myself.
wrote them yourself already? Man, you must have got the writing bug, like, obviously very early.
I did. At age 13, I actually started writing. And I don't know how, I really don't know how it happened, but I was playing like stock arrangements with the local dance bands. And after playing these arrangements for so long, something inside me says, I can do this. And when I wrote my first arrangement, it was just one big, huge success.
Wow.
And if you know anything about how an arranger feels hearing one of his or her own works played back, that's a great feeling.
Sure is. Did you ever have to fix things early on that, I mean, it was like a learning process of, well, I tried that, it doesn't work so good, so next time I'll voice this differently?
Oh yeah, it was all trial and error
Yeah.
at first. All I knew was that basically chords were voiced in thirds. That's all I knew. And I went on for that. I think I had a natural gift for melody. I think I still have it.
Yes. I would say from your track record, yes, that's true.
And so I worked from that and learned little things as I went along. I learned that not all chords had to be voiced in thirds.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have some seconds and some fourths in there. And I began to learn about altered chords, and that just really fascinated me. And there was a friend of mine who was also an alto saxophonist, and he and I together were studying a score that was written by a professional who was in his 20s at the time, a guy named Norris Turney, an excellent alto saxophonist. And we saw all these weird voicings, like these half steps and minor thirds next to half steps and whole steps. And it just boggled our minds. How could somebody put an F next to a G flat? You know, just this was something that was unthinkable. And now I can hardly voice a chord without a half step somewhere in there.
Got to have that little bit of dissonance, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. You met or you played with another Basie, future Basie player, Snooky Young.
Yes.
Recently on.
Yes.
Yeah.
He actually started me on my professional career, if you want to call it that. After my third year of college, I was a college dropout to go play music with Snooky Young's band. He had an excellent 10-piece band, and they had a 7-week engagement in Detroit. And this engagement started in August, and my parents had the understanding that I would be back in time to enter school in the fall for my senior year. Well, as it happened, I had the misfortune of having 3 instruments stolen: an alto, a brand new tenor, and a clarinet from the club where we were working. So on the pretense of helping the detectives locate my instruments, I said I got to stay in Detroit. That was my excuse. Because at the time, Detroit was like a mecca. Detroit just as well could have been New York. There were so many wonderful musicians there, from Barry Harris to Tommy Flanagan to Kenny Burrell to Donald Byrd, the Jones Brothers. Detroit was heaven. I just didn't want to leave. So I stayed, and I missed my senior year in college. And I did all this without being disinherited by my parents.
That's good. Were they eventually pretty supportive of your musical
Yes, they were.
endeavors?
They were always supportive. They always encouraged me to practice, to work hard. They bought every instrument that I owned until I was 21.
I think you mentioned something about your father listening to you practicing the new music.
Well, he heard me playing the new music with the group, and he said, what is that bippity-bop?
Bippity-bop. Well, he wasn't far from wrong, right? He got the bop right.
Right, he got the bop right. I wish I had asked him to spell bippity-bop.
Yeah.
that might, we could have a new movement going.
But you also said something I think is very important, in that you wanted to tell him, he said, I don't understand it.
Right.
And you wanted to tell him that he wasn't supposed to be able to understand.
Yeah, it was not for him to understand. He was, you know, the wrong generation.
Yeah.
This is for us
That's right.
youngins.
It seems like that keeps going on and on.
Yeah,
Every generation,
actually
right?
it does. It does. It's an inevitable fact, I think, of our existence.
Yeah. How was your experience in the service? Did you get to play?
Oh yes, I got to play lots in the service. Before going overseas, I was shipped to the Far East, where after basic training, the Korean campaign was going on. But I was stationed at a camp that was halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles in the California foothills. And it was called Camp Roberts. And the reason I ended up going to San Francisco as opposed to Los Angeles was that there was a gentleman offering rides to San Francisco in his Cadillac. And he lived in the San Francisco area. He lived in a little city called Hayward. And if he had been offering rides to Los Angeles, that's where I would have ended up going. But I ended up going to San Francisco, and I discovered Bop City, which was a local nightclub which operated after hours. So whenever musicians finished their normal engagements that might have lasted between 8 and 1 a.m., they went and converged on Bop City. And that's where all the heavyweight jam sessions occurred. And I walked in with my GI clothes on, and people immediately wondered, who is this strange-looking person with a silver-plated horn and a case that looked like it needed surgery very badly. So there was a gentleman by the name of Dexter Gordon who was appearing there. And Dexter himself, up until his death, told this story about the so-called Soldier Boy. I ran into someone who was from Detroit, and I told this person that I had played with Sonny Stitt. And so this person had a little pull and got me on the bandstand with Dexter Gordon. And Dexter asked me, well, what would you like to play? And I said, well, how about Cherokee? Cherokee? Where would you like to play it? Up-tempo. So he obliged, and we lit into Cherokee at a very rapid tempo. And I was able to keep up. And a lot of people say that no, I'm not going to say this on the video.
Could I say it for you? That you kind of shut him down, or you cut him?
That's what some people say, yeah.
You cut him.
I won't say that.
Right. Okay, it's not for you to say, but obviously you made a good impression that night.
Yeah, I think so. And from that point on, I was known as the Soldier Boy.
No kidding.
And yeah, even Ralph Gleason, the late Ralph Gleason, wrote about it in Downbeat. So there's a guy called Soldier Boy who's been taking everyone on tenor around here lately.
Cool.
And I ran into such great musicians as the late Phineas Newborn. And I ran as the first time I ever saw Ray Charles. Ray Charles played alto sax at the time. And he came through there. And one time, Jazz at the Philharmonic was in town. And Lester Young and a whole bunch of people from the Philharmonic, I don't know who all they were. And I was trying my best to just play all I know and just trying to impress these people. And later on, someone asked Lester Young, well, what do you think about this Frank Foster? And he said, I don't like him, he plays too many notes. And that's when I learned my lesson on simplicity.
Good lesson, like coming from him especially.
Right.
Yeah.
All this information, by the way, is contained in my autobiography, which hopefully will be out in a few months.
All right. Glad to hear that. After the service, by the way, when you were in the service on the West Coast, was it still pretty segregated?
Not, well, how can I say? Do you mean in the military, on the military side of it?
Yeah.
Somewhat, yes. I trained, basic training in an all-black company that was part of an all-black battalion.
Right.
But as soon as I got to Japan and Korea, it was all over. It was totally integrated.
I see.
But I didn't mention about how much I got to play while I was in Japan and Korea. I was in Japan for a very short while and only taking school training to be a clerk typist. This was to stay out of the war zone.
Yeah.
So after that, I was shipped to the war zone. And I was in a service company of a infantry regiment for a few months. And then I went and auditioned for the division band and got in the division band. And while there, I performed with a concert band, a marching band, and a jazz combo, as well as a sort of dance band. In all these contexts, for the remainder of my time in Korea, and never had to serve on the front line. and there was quite a bit of playing. So I was able to stay up on the instrument.
Great. That was early in the war, wasn't it? 52?
52, yes. 51, I was drafted into the Army, and most of 51 was spent in the California area, San Francisco, and I went AWOL for over a month over Thanksgiving and Christmas, because I was afraid that after I finished basic training, the idea of going actually into the war as an infantry rifleman, you know, that just scared me to death. So I said, well, I'm gonna stay out here and live a little. And there was no timetable as to when I was gonna turn myself in, but there was a lady that I was friendly with who persuaded me to turn myself in. She said, please, turn yourself in, don't get caught. If they catch you out here, I'll never see you again.
Yeah.
That was the rationale she used on me. So I said, okay, I'll turn myself in. And certain other people who professed to be in the know said, turn yourself into the chaplain. He'll understand. So I went back. I had evaded military police all that time, even hung out with a commissioned officer for a while in Bob City. And he never knew I was AWOL. So after I went back to turn myself in, I went straight to the chaplain and I told him my story. And he said, well, son, you're a musician, is that right? Yes. What kind of music do you play? And why did I tell him I played jazz? He said, oh, that's too bad. You know, that jazz that's not the music you should be playing. It's all right if you play church music, you know, religious music. And these are his exact words, and this is the title of one of my chapters, You'll Have to Give Up That Jazz, Son. And that's the title of chapter 7 in my book.
All right.
Needless to say, I was very distraught at having gone to see the chaplain.
Yeah, thanks for the help.
Yeah, thank you guys for steering me in this direction. So I was under a military court-martial, and I was sentenced to a month in the stockade. And I spent 5 days in the stockade, after which I was shipped to the Far East. And I landed in Japan, and a few weeks later I was sent to Korea. And the fighting was going on hot and heavy, and this was early 1952, in March 9th, to the exact day I landed in Korea. And it was a horrible looking day, and I'll never forget that. But I spent 13 months and 13 days in Korea.
You have a pretty good memory for significant
Yeah, I can't remember
dates.
where I was yesterday, but this I remember. And fortunately, after about 3 months in the service company of the infantry regiment, I got into the band and was able to perform in these various contexts that I described a few moments earlier. And after being released or shipped back to the United States, I came back to Detroit. Now, this was May of 1953. My first day in town, don't have any civilian clothes, walking around in my Army uniform. I ran into an old friend who said, Count Basie's looking for you. I said, Count Basie's looking for me? Nobody knows I'm here. I said, Count Basie's looking for you. You better go over to I forget what the ballroom, the Greystone Ballroom or something like that. The Basie Band was actually appearing that night. So I went over there, and surely enough, Lockjaw Davis was planning to leave, and Ernie Wilkins and Jimmy Wilkins, who were in the band at the time. Jimmy, with whom I had been in college, Jimmy Wilkins had been my band leader in Wilberforce University, the leader of the Wilberforce Collegians. And they, along with Billy Eckstein, had recommended me for the band, but they didn't know where I was at the time. So I showed up.
That is really wild.
The right place at the right time, and
so.
3 months later, I was in the Count Basie Orchestra, July 27th, 1953.
Had you had a chance while you were in the service to still be listening to recordings of them?
Not too much. I was listening to a lot of small group stuff
Right.
at the time. There weren't too many things happening.
Well, plus he had broken up the band.
He'd broken up the band from 1949 to about 52, I think,
Yeah.
50. And
So you kind of got in on the New Testament
that's right.
band.
At pretty much the beginning of the New
Right.
Testament band.
That's really, I'm sure it makes great print in your book.
Well,
Here you come.
yeah,
First day back, I'm still walking around in my uniform.
That's right. It's a true story. And I mean, I couldn't have made that up.
Yeah, right.
There are other stories in there that I could never have made up either.
Well, here you are in a big band now. You're still enamored of bop.
Yeah.
Did you go through a period of trying to adjust your style, or feel that you needed to adjust your style to play what was required, or to fit the Basie band and still satisfy your need for bop?
Well, that was a problem that existed the entire 11 years I was with the band. I never had the feeling that I really fit, except on up-tempo songs. I was trying to fill Lester Young's shoes and really was not making it, to my way of thinking. I mean, I was reading the music, no problem reading and interpreting the music, and the saxophone section at that time was excellent, with Marshall Rowe playing lead, Frank West playing either alto or the other tenor, and Charlie Folks playing baritone, and the second alto chair was the only chair that just fluctuated all throughout the entire time I was there. So I fitted into the section very well, and because I loved big band music and playing in the section and all that. But soloing, I always felt that I fell a little short of what I should have been because of trying to fill Lester Young's shoes.
Yeah.
And it was just, they were just too big. And it was an adjustment that I never satisfactorily made to my own satisfaction. Oh. And one time, I, as a tongue-in-cheek, just for laughs, I did an imitation of Ben Webster with the growl and the guttural type of sound, and Basie loved it. And he said, "Hey, do that again, kid, do that again." And so...
Did you get stuck with that then, a little bit?
No, I didn't get stuck with it because I just refused to continue to do it. And he didn't insist that I play like Ben Webster every time I stood up. But he loved that style of playing. That's why he loved Eddie Lockjaw Davis, and he loved anybody that played that kind of sound, like Paul Gonzalez. And there was a tenor player named Harold Ashby who had that sort of approach to tenor, and he liked this guy, but Harold couldn't read too well. But Basie said, "I don't care if he can't read, I just like his playing."
He sure had a thing for tenors, didn't he?
Yeah, he really did. And I think he liked that tenor rivalry thing. I think he got a kick out of that between Lester Young and Buddy Tate. And at one point it was Lester Young and Don Bias. and Coleman Hawkins might have been in there for a minute. I'm not sure, but anyway.
And Herschel Evans earlier.
Herschel Evans, that's the one.
Right.
Yeah, Herschel Evans and Lester Young. He loved that kind of the difference in styles and the sort of friendly
rivalry there.
Going on. Yeah, he loved that, and we loved it too.
Yeah. Did Basie ever indicate dissatisfaction with your playing, what you were feeling yourself? Did you feel that from him?
No, he didn't. Only on one occasion he made me feel that way. Now, I was featured on several up-tempo pieces like Little Pony, Jumping into Woodside, and that sort of became my specialty. And one time I approached him, I said, "Look, Bass, why don't you let me play a ballad?" And he said, "Well, you do all right on Jumping into Woodside. You don't need to play a ballad." And he said this because he knew that I could not play a ballad at the time. I just, a ballad played with the bebop concept didn't fit that band. Don Byas, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Herschel Evans, those guys played ballads in a manner that would fit the Basie band. But I wanted to be all over my horn. You know, I didn't want to settle down on a simple melody. And I got a chance to just play all I knew on songs like Jumping at the Woodside, the up-tempo songs. But he was right. My tone had not developed to a logical point where I was a good choice for a ballad. And it was proven on record. There's a recording that I hope you won't go listen to.
Let me see if I have it here.
Of me playing Ain't Misbehavin' with the Basie Orchestra. And I tried to emulate Sonny Stitt playing it. He had a version of Ain't Misbehavin'.
Oh.
But I listened to it later and I said, no, this is not happening. I didn't have the sound or the approach to play a ballad convincingly with the Basie Orchestra. And he saw to it that I didn't play any ballads. And rightly so.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't in.
He knew what he wanted.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned tone because the tone issue shows up so much more when you're playing a ballad.
Yeah,
As you mentioned, if you're
definitely.
playing up-tempo thing, maybe your tone, it goes by so quickly.
Right. You can get away with not having a well-rounded, full, big sound.
Right.
Now, I have made comparisons with myself, my present, the 1980s, 1990s Frank Foster, and the 1950s Frank Foster. And I think Basie would like the way I play a ballad now. If I could have played a ballad then the way I can play one now, I think he would have accepted me.
Was it just the years of experience that did
Hello,
it?
that's all it was.
Yeah.
And developing a sound
Uh-huh.
along with the years of experience.
Yeah. How about the first time you brought an arrangement to Basie?
The first arrangement I brought to the Basie band was one I brought from Korea with me that I had played with the band in Korea. It was an original cha-cha-cha.
No kidding.
And the band needed a couple of Latin-flavored songs for the dancers that they were playing. And they only had one mambo. So, no, this was a mambo, not a cha-cha-cha.
You wrote a mambo.
This was an
Okay.
original sort of thing based on a mambo groove. And it was very simple, and I brought it into the band and we played it. And Basie encouraged me to continue writing. And the results of that encouragement were Blues Backstage and Blues in Horse Flat, and eventually Shiny Stockings. But it's not all peaches and cream or roses, as it were. If you could count the arrangements that were rejected as stacked up against those that were accepted, the the stacks would be pretty even.
No kidding.
Right.
So you take it into a rehearsal, and did it take him a long time to decide?
No, it never took him a long time. If the arrangement played down the first time and nobody had to decipher it as though it were hieroglyphics and it swung, it was in. Generally, if it took too long and people had to labor over phrases and how does this go and what does this mean, and if it sounded like too much dissonance or too many pregnant 19s, as Basie used to say.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, he said, son, when you write an arrangement, don't put too many pregnant 19s in there. So I knew what he meant by pregnant 19s. And if it was too busy, too overloaded, every time it got rejected. Which brings me to the story of Shiny Stockings. We were playing a place in Philadelphia called Pep's Bar. And we just arrived in town that morning, and we had to rehearse that day because it was customary to rehearse on the opening day of each nightclub engagement for the Basie band. That was practically the only time we ever rehearsed, was the opening day of an engagement at Birdland or Storyville or the Blue Note or the Crescendo or Birdland at this place in Philadelphia. But we had arrived late and checked in late at the hotel, a long trip from somewhere. Everybody is tired, ill-tempered, hungry, and no one felt like rehearsing. You know, we'd rather have done anything than rehearse. But we had to rehearse that day, and I brought Shiny Stockings in. And the first rehearsal of Shiny Stockings, it just sounded like a 43-car pilot on a New York thruway.
Whoa.
Everybody ran into everybody. I said, oh my God, he'll never play this song. And I put so much into it. Well, Mr. Basie must have heard something, because with that horrible rehearsal, he must have understood how tired everyone was and how unwilling we were to rehearse, and that was the result of our attitudes. He must have heard something, because we played it and played it and played it, and I guess you could say the rest is history.
I guess so.
But at many other songs that sounded like that in rehearsal never got played.
Yeah.
And we had an expression, if we were rehearsing something and it wasn't going well, either because it was too busy or the harmonies weren't right or it sounded amateurish, we had an expression, Pasadena, which meant pass it in. And after we'd work on the chart for about 10 or 15 minutes, Marshall Royal, who was the straw boss, he'd say, Pasadena. And I guess this was sort of code terminology so that the arranger, if the arranger was somebody outside the band, he wouldn't know what we were talking about. But you'd see all this music converging on one spot, which meaning it was being passed in.
But you knew. Did it hurt your feelings? I mean...
Well, they never said that about arrangements by guys in the band.
Oh.
But when a lot of people outside the band submitted music.
Yeah.
And including some seasoned professional arrangers that were supposed to know their craft. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them would just leave the arrangement at the Basie office, and it'd be passed out to the band. And if we shook our heads, sometimes we didn't even have to wait for Basie. He wasn't always rehearsing with us. He might be sitting over in a corner smoking a cigar somewhere, reading a paper. And it was sounding pretty corny. We'd look at each other, and the next thing would be Pasadena. And that'd be the end of that.
Do you think you had an advantage writing for the band you were playing in?
Yes, definitely. The arrangers who were in the band, namely Thad Jones, Frank West, myself, Ernie Wilkins while he was still there, and and the late Eric Dixon, definitely had an advantage being in the band. We knew the personalities we were surrounded by, and we knew each other's strong points. We knew how to write for each other's strong points, and to de-emphasize weak points, of which there were very few. I mean, everybody in that band was a section person, if not a great soloist. Everybody in there was a seasoned section player. And we just had a great advantage over outside arrangers. And people like Nelson, the late Nelson Riddle would bring, you know, stuff in. And we'd play something of Nelson Riddle's, yeah, it's all right. And then Thad Jones would lay something down and be all over.
How did Neil Hefti fare as far as his piles?
Neil Hefti fared very well.
Yeah.
Neil, yeah, he sort of had a formula that worked with the Basie band.
Yeah.
As attested to the success of Little Darling and Whirly Bird, among others, of a dozen others that really made it. In fact, some people thought that Neil Hefti's writing was the best definitive Basie of that period. But then on the other hand, some people thought my writing was the same thing. And on the other hand, some people thought Thad Jones' writing was. And some of the successful writers for the band were Benny Carter and Quincy Jones and Billy Byers. Those were three masters, all of whom contributed some very significant music to the band. Others weren't so fortunate.
Well, I guess you could, it was partly my left-handed compliment to say I was rejected by Count Basie.
Yeah,
At least they read it once.
I'll tell you, Basie, he would always make it up because years after, this must have been in the early 60s, now Shiny Stockings was introduced to the book in 1955. Basie pulled me over in the corner and he said, "Kid, you know, you wrote that Shiny Stockings?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You really put him one down that time, boy."
That was 5 years later. Huh?
Yeah, right.
He was a man of few words most of the time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But every word meant something.
Yeah. Just like his playing, right?
Right, exactly, like his playing. He used to say, it's best to know what to leave out than to put too much in. And then he'd have a saying like, "It's the little things that mean so much." And what he meant by that was very few notes, but making a definite statement, rather than just taking the ink pen and throwing it at the paper and splattering ink all over and trying to get somebody to play that.
Wow. Well, you were a young man. Did you enjoy being on the road with that band?
Definitely.
The traveling?
Up until about the time I left, I really enjoyed being on the road.
Mostly bus travel?
Mostly bus at the time. There was some air travel, but mostly the bus. And I didn't fall out of love with the bus until years later.
That's a good phrase. Did the band experience any racial troubles in different parts of the country?
Yes. And now this is in the early, mid, and late 50s. We played one place in Texas, I don't know if it was Houston or somewhere, where, you'll love this, where it was a dance hall, and there was this rope that extended from the bandstand on to the end of the place, I don't know how far. White folks, white patrons were on one side of the rope and the black patrons on the other side of the rope. And neither the twain could meet. Now, I can't recall which were on the side where the dance floor was, where they could actually dance. Maybe it depended on who the owners of the place were, but I remember this rope. There was another place where black patrons were confined to the balcony. Now, as much as black folks loved to dance, they had to come and sit in the balcony and listen and couldn't dance. And the dance floor was reserved for the white patrons.
Did you ever have an experience in that kind of scenario where the music eventually brought the two groups together?
I think, I can't recall specific instances, but I think perhaps that's what happened.
Yeah.
With the breakdown of segregation, we did see the two come together.
Yeah.
And then it was great, you know, because I love to watch good dancers, and there are good dancers in both ethnic or racial groups, you know. We've played some ballrooms where people just look beautiful on the dance floor. I mean, really know what they're doing. And these really they really were bad for our morale when we experienced the segregation. We used to get angry with the leader. We'd say, why does he allow himself to perform at these places, you know, where they got segregation? But we didn't realize that we didn't perform these places. We didn't work at all. Yeah. I mean, if you you can't just work in one area for your whole career. You have to branch out. We had to, you know, it was a world-renowned orchestra. They had to go everywhere. They couldn't just stay at New York and work Birdland the year round.
Right.
Or Chicago and work Blue Note the year round. We had to go from one place to the other. And of course that included going south. And eventually when these problems worked out, we were very happy. The other instances were times in Las Vegas. We first went to Las Vegas. Blacks were not allowed into the places on the Strip, you know, the Sands and the Flamingo and all those places like that. As patrons, they couldn't attend. And all the blacks had to be confined to the Dust Bowls, which was the area that was the hood in those times. Where on the west side of Las Vegas, they called it the Dust Bowl. So when the band worked the Flamingo or the Sands, especially the Flamingo, not so much the Sands, I don't remember. We worked in the casino, and during intermission, the musicians were instructed to hang out in the kitchen. In other words, not to fraternize with the guests. And we had no dressing. They didn't make dressing rooms for musicians back then. So, and we got tired of hanging out in the kitchen, you know. I mean, you know, sometimes kitchens don't smell that nice. Yeah. And they aren't made specifically to accommodate musicians during intermission. So a few of us got the idea. This is where I first heard the word militant. Somebody said, man, we got to be militant. We can't go for this. Hanging out in the kitchen and not fraternizing with the guests. If somebody came in there that we knew, and a lot of us had many white friends, you know, we'd buck the system and go hang out with them. And we almost got ourselves fired.
Wow. For
fraternizing with guests. Now that's a situation that I'm very happy came to an end in the early 60s. But just think, the early 60s, how late that is.
Really,
even.
That's hard to imagine. And I want to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because I know you had a significant impact musically with that. What finally decision to leave Basie? Was it just a length of time you were there?
It was a number of things. Mostly, I had a family that was growing. I had two children in my first marriage, and not being able to stay home more than a few weeks at a time, I was not able to really watch my kids grow up. And my wife at the time was pressuring me, come off the road, come off the road. She didn't say that until after we'd had 2 children. During the early stage of our marriage, she did a lot of traveling with me. But then the children came and they kept her at home. And with my being gone so much, she was pressuring me for months, come off the road. I mean, incessantly, come off the road, come off the road. That was the big phrase in the house.
Yeah.
And I was becoming dissatisfied with the nature of the engagements we were playing. In other words, it wasn't as exciting to go to Europe anymore, because as opposed to when we first started going to Europe back in 1954 through 1960, the European audiences were dyed-in-the-wool jazz lovers. They came to hear the Basie band because they loved the Basie band. They loved the individual members of the Basie band. They knew who we were better than we knew. They knew facts about us that we had forgotten. A European would come up to me and say, in 1957 you did such and such, and you played with so-and-so, and you recorded with so-and-so. I said, oh, I had forgotten that. They did their homework. They knew the history of the music, and they loved the music. And then gradually the audiences changed. I guess these people died off or something. And the audiences became mostly families, like people. Maybe one guy, he loves the band, he brings his whole family, his wife and his sister and her husband and their children. And not everybody's feeling the way he's feeling about it. And it got to appear as though a lot of people were coming just out of curiosity. Like, well, let's go see what this Basie band is about. I've been hearing a lot about them. Let's see what they are.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not the Beatles. Oh, they're not like, they don't play rock and roll. Or, oh, they.
Well, you anticipated my question. I wondered if that was what was causing it, was the rock and roll revolution.
I think the advent of rock and roll and how the big beat just inundated the world, and I think that kind of just put a damper on things. The crowds, the big band groupies disappeared. In the early, late 50s, we had big band groupies by the busloads.
No kidding.
And that was falling off. But it wasn't so much that as the nature of the audiences was changing, and it didn't appear that everyone there was a devout jazz lover and a devout Basie lover. And so trips to Europe got to be not so exciting. And sometimes accommodations were a little touch and go. And I began to get tired of the bus. We began to become weary of smelling each other's armpits.
Yeah. Basically living with each other all the time.
Yeah, basically living with each other all the time.
Yeah.
And some guys who came in the band couldn't get along with guys who were already there, and there were a couple of even fist fights and things, all manner of things that were making road life not as glamorous and as fun and as happy as it had been. The novelty had worn off, and I had gotten involved in so many different kinds of undesirable affairs, and personal life was just in a shambles. And I wanted to be closer to these children. So all these influences, and plus, the big thing was I wasn't getting to play enough.
Oh.
You know,
16 bars here, 16 bars there.
Yeah.
Wasn't
And the fact of not getting to play a ballad and wanting to play a ballad, that really ate me up. And because I was of the mind then, well, if you just give me a chance, I'll learn, I'll get better. But not to have a chance at all.
Yeah.
But don't misunderstand, there was no animosity toward Mr. Basie. There was just this gnawing desire to be in a situation where I could get to play more. I wanted to play more. And so for family reasons and musical reasons, I wanted to get out. Plus, some of the most exciting players had left. Thad Jones had left. I think Joe Newman had left. And Billy Mitchell had left. Al Gray had left.
Yeah.
And we were some of the replacements for some of these guys weren't up to the same level. Even personally, they weren't as much fun to be around. And not only did they not play as well, you know.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to find, not just a musical replacement, but a personality that's going to fit into this great thing you had going.
Right. That band from the mid-50s until 61 was a force that no one could come up against as far as I'm concerned. And then after 62, 63, 64, it just began to dissipate. It began to be something else.
Yeah.
Even the arrangements that were brought in weren't as exciting or as, and then when we did this is no dig at old Blue Eyes, but we started doing the Frank Sinatra songbook, and tunes like Come Fly With Me. I couldn't relate too heavily to some of the new fare that was coming in, musical fare. Yeah. And it was commercially very acceptable to a large segment of our public. But I wasn't getting to play enough. And more arrangements by outside arrangers being used. So I just, for all these reasons, I finally just gave it up in July 31st of 1964.
There you go again.
11 years and 4 days after I joined.
Yeah. Did you say 11?
11 years.
11 years, wow. And you had mentioned Sinatra and thinking about vocalists. Did the guys in the band ever kind of resent the vocalist being out front and, doing 4 or 5 songs a night? And was that something that you guys felt like you didn't feel was necessary?
Well, the professionalism in this particular orchestra didn't allow for that kind of attitude on a large scale. And we loved Sinatra, we loved Billy Eckstine, we loved Sarah Vaughan, and we loved Tony Bennett. And there just was no feeling of that kind. Whenever we knew we were going to work with them, we said, well, we're going to have some fun now.
Right.
Some others who shall remain nameless, we didn't have as much fun with, because some of them didn't have the quality arrangements that we would like to play. And some of them didn't have that jazz singer mentality. Now, see the Sinatras, the Joe Williams, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Tony Bennett, they have jazz singer mentalities. In other words, you sing a chorus, somebody stands up and blows a chorus. Somebody else stands up and blows a chorus. Then you come back and sing a chorus. Some singers who just have a pop singer mentality. Give me an introduction, I sing my song, nobody solos, and I take it out. And everybody's happy. Or at least I'm happy. So any singers, vocalists with a jazz singer mentality, we accept it. Those with the pop singer mentality, we reject it.
Yeah. Well, you certainly had a powerhouse band there for those years, plus with Joe Williams on board, and great time. Fortunately, you recorded a lot.
Yes.
So it's documented.
It definitely is documented, especially in the Mosaic series of the live recordings between 1959 and 62. That is Count Basie. New Testament Count Basie.
Right. Well, on to a new career for you in the early '60s, and I want to talk a little bit about the Loud Minority. You had described yourself as a, let me see if I got this right, in between moderate and militant.
Yeah, a mod mill. Yeah.
Mod mill, thank you. You felt a social, let's say, responsibility or urge to be involved in the civil rights movement?
Yes, I did. I didn't want to be one of the Black Panthers or one of the 5%ers. I didn't want to be a part of the group that said by any means necessary, you know, and if you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. I mean, I felt a type of militance, but I wasn't going to be involved in any violent confrontations. I would have gladly participated in a nonviolent demonstration. I never did, but of the type that Martin Luther King was about. I didn't want to act on a hatred of the other side. That wasn't what it was about. I had too many friends and fans who were white, and they lamented the racial climate, the unfavorable racial climate. You know, they didn't like the injustice that was going on. If I told one of them about what happened in Texas with the rope and the balcony scene, they would have said, "What? Oh man, you know, that's ridiculous." So I was more a nonviolent protester in my mentality. So I was totally with Martin Luther King. I wasn't one of the ones that wanted to overthrow the government with an armed revolution. And besides, that was very impractical with being only 1/10 of the population.
Yes.
How is that going to happen?
Let's deal with reality.
Yeah,
right?
let's deal with reality. And I figured that it was able to be done peacefully. But on the other hand, I hated hearing about those whites who just didn't want to hear it. What do these people want? I didn't want to hear that.
Yeah.
You know, don't ask me, what do you people want? You know good and well what we want. You know, what was it that James Brown said? Don't give it to me. Open the door, I'll get it myself.
Good statement.
You know, that's the idea. Give us a chance to do for ourselves, you know, give us the opportunities, open the door, and we'll do the rest. But don't keep the door shut and then tell us, well, be happy with your janitorial jobs or whatever. So when I heard about, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, the name of your new band eventually was kind of inspired by that phrase that was going on at
Right,
the time.
the silent majority. I don't know if I interpreted that correctly. All I knew is that my idea of the silent majority were those who really didn't think these people deserved what they wanted, and that they weren't like us, so they didn't deserve to have it. But if that's the way it's going, well, so be it. But we don't approve of it. And I think these silent majority people lumped all black folks together like we're all the same. As soon as one stood on the corner and raised a clenched fist and said, by any means necessary, we're going to get what we want. And if we have to have an armed, insurrection, that's what it takes, that's what it's got to be. But we didn't all feel like that. And we were split in our ranks because any of us who said, no, nonviolence is what it's about. It ain't about taking a gun and shooting as many white people as you can. That's not going to solve anything. So we were the Uncle Toms.
Oh.
We, on the other hand, hated being called Uncle Toms because we weren't coming with our head bowed and our hat in our hand or getting on our knees saying, please, Mr. Charlie, would you give us this? Would let us do this? And, we were just saying, hey, let's, man to man, let's hit it off. You can do this, I can do this, let's do this together. Not you do this and tell me I have to do that. So we weren't begging, but we weren't coming with guns drawn, So,
you both wanted the same thing,
yeah,
but you wanted to get there in different ways.
right.
Yeah.
So I resented being referred to as Uncle Tom. I hate that expression. And a lot of people that feel the same way I do we can't stomach that. But we're not about violence. That's why Martin Luther King was my leader. And when they got rid of him, and it's funny how as soon as, not one day after he was assassinated, certain commentators got on the radio and said, well, with the assassination of Martin Luther King, the black civil rights movement is officially dead. Yeah, it's over. Yeah. Martin Luther King's gone. There's no more civil rights movement. And we said, hey, wait a minute. No, it ain't about that. But it almost appeared as though that's the way it went down. And I was going to write this song called Hey Brothers and Sisters, What Happened to the Revolution? It was the early 70s. It never got composed because I was so busy trying to make a living at this time. But as a means of getting back at people who were assaulting my ears with this silent majority, I said, hey, I will call my orchestra the loud minority. And I put out this recording where I got Dee Dee Bridgewater espousing all this rhetoric that I came up with, the loud minority as opposed to you-know-who.
And you guys did play loud too, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. We lived up to our name. That's a fact. We definitely were telling the truth about who we were.
Was it a form of controlled chaos at some of your?
Did you hear me use that expression?
No, I didn't. But
I use that expression sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I've read and I've heard some of the music, and I've read, up to 25 musicians at some point that
Yeah, I used to call it controlled chaos.
No kidding. I may have read that. Could be I read that. It was in my
I don't know if it ever
somewhere.
appeared in print, but I used to announce it publicly.
Yeah? Oh, no kidding.
We're about to bring you an hour of controlled chaos. Oh no, I call it controlled confusion. That's what it was, controlled
Okay.
confusion, which is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But now the music wasn't meant to be revolutionary in nature. I just wanted to swing. That's all. I wanted to play some good music that everybody who liked music could listen to. It wasn't wanting to. This is for black folks only, or
Yeah.
this is for white folks only. This is for everybody. Anybody who likes this music is free to listen and free to pay admission, come in.
Yeah.
But the loud minorities, that title stood for something.
Was this your first experience as a band leader, per se?
Well, as a professional, yes. My first experience was a band leader. Came in my senior year of high school.
Oh, that's
when I
right.
had the
We have to go
12
back
piece
there.
band of kids, high school age. And I wasn't much of a leader, but for that year, I was the man. So this was my first experience as a professional.
You mentioned a short time ago that you were busy trying to make a living. How did you, as a not in a? By the way, when you were with Basie, were you on a salary?
Yes, I was.
Okay, it wasn't like you paid for each particular night.
No, we had a salary.
paid a
Everybody
salary,
was on
okay.
salary.
So now that you're not on Basie's salary anymore, what was your major way of paying your rent?
At the time, it was playing whatever gig came my way. It was a club date. By club date, I mean one of these square occasions where you played for people who dance with two left feet. And you had to play everything from Hello Dolly to Mame to whatever else squares like. And a lot of engagements where people come by and they pass by the band and they look up, oh, there's a bunch of waiters standing on stage. I mean, that's what the attitude, they don't say this specifically, but that's what it looks like they're thinking. If we have both ties and we're dressed like the waiters, they think we're some waiters who play music. But, and then there were some jazz gigs. I made connections with jazz musicians, and Joe Newman was instrumental in getting me a lot of gigs, a lot of work around town, and on a few recordings. And Benny Powell as well. He'd left the band before I left, the trombonist, and these connections, I worked a few jazz gigs and some clubs. And at that time, I was still getting writing assignments. I might write for there was a time when I was hired to write for Frankie Lyman or something.
Sure.
And O.C. Smith hired me to do some writing for him. I did the writing for an Irene Reed recording session that was done with a big band. Quincy Jones commissioned me to do an album with Sarah Vaughan, and there was a varied type of instrumental group there. So between writing assignments and playing freelance engagements, I was able to make a living. But I was on my second marriage, and my second wife, who's now my present wife of over 30 years, worked a regular job. She'd been in the workforce for some years. When she met me, she was in the workforce.
I see.
And she stayed in the workforce until last year.
No kidding.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And so our income complemented one another.
Right.
Without her income, I wouldn't have been able to buy a home.
Yeah.
To be truthful with you, I would have just been in some apartment in Manhattan
Right.
trying to make the rent.
Scraping, I guess.
Scraping,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
One musician put it, well on your way to starving.
Really? Yeah.
I can't remember who it was, but
I called it freelance starving.
it's pretty.
And when people tell me, like, the 22 years that I was out of the Basie Orchestra until the time I took over as leader, that was my period of freelance starving.
Gee, when you left Basie, you were in your late 30s? Or
Yes, I was in my, mid-30s.
Yeah. So it was almost like, you think of athletes retiring from a certain type of thing that they've done for so long, and now, it's on to something else.
I didn't have the mentality to go into
Right.
promotion or,
Yeah.
or
Well, I'm glad you stayed with music.
oh, definitely, so am I.
Yeah. You got to record some small group things over the years.
Yes.
And I had a couple things I wanted to ask you about. In 1980, I think you did a magazine article. I've always thought of your own music and the combos as pretty progressive. And you had this article that said, "I'll never make it big in music because my stuff is just too old-fashioned."
Yeah. Well, this, you have to keep in mind, this was a publication that was handed out in the streets free of charge, free of cost.
Okay.
It was called the Jazz Spotlight News.
Uh-huh.
And there were several people behind it. One was a man named Jim Harrison, who was, he's just been a sort of a jazz hustler all his life. He promotes concert, passes out handbills.
Yeah.
And he's done this for like 30 or 40 years and made his living working in this sort of offbeat promotional area of jazz.
I bet he doesn't drive a Cadillac.
He certainly doesn't, and he still lives in a hotel.
Uh-huh.
But this Jazz Spotlight News was, I think, a very worthwhile venture in which everybody who contributed talked about the music and the field and the business, the affairs of music, just the way they felt. They weren't politically motivated to lean toward one side or the other. They straight ahead exactly how they felt, pulling no punches.
Mm-hmm.
And when I wrote this article, "I'll never make it big in music because my stuff is just too old-fashioned," was based on true life experiences since leaving the Basie band. I was told, like in so many words, your stuff is just not what's happening now.
Comparing it to Coltrane or something, or the avant-garde or free jazz.
The avant-garde, free jazz, funk, rock and roll.
Yeah. Okay. Soul jazz.
Soul jazz,
Whatever you wanna call it.
Yeah. Other words,
Yeah.
to keep telling the truth musically was financially unfeasible.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, I was wondering, am I just not that good? Or is it the right people haven't latched on to the Frank Foster bandwagon? Or people in power haven't said, well, that he's it? Or what? Or is there an actual, I was getting paranoid, is there an actual anti-Frank Foster campaign going on?
Uh-huh.
Or are there people who are saying, no, don't let him through? Either he's too good or he's not good enough. I was baffled. I didn't know what the story was. I like my stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I think every artist is supposed to like his or her own creation. I don't believe in going around talking about, no, that's garbage. I did that, but that's nothing. And somebody says, oh, I love your work. Oh, it's nothing. Oh. They tell me they love my work. I say, thank you very much.
If it's nothing, why'd you do it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Why you waste your time doing nothing? No, I like what I do, and I've always liked what I did. And if I did something that I didn't think was good, I got to improve on that.
Yeah.
Especially in the area of playing. I always thought that my writing might have been a little ahead of my playing. Because in writing, you don't have to put down forever the first thing you think of. You know, when you're improvising, what you're coming up with spontaneously, that's it. And if it's on record, it's down forever for posterity or whatever. When you're writing something, you can write something down and say, yeah, that's pretty good, but I think I can improve on it. And constantly change the melody or change the note here or there or a phrase and make it into what it's supposed to be. And then I think, boy, I wish I could play something like this, just soloing.
Yeah.
But I did have this confusion going on in my mind. Am I good? Am I not good? Am I supposed to be worshipped by everybody in the public? If out of a group of 10,000 people, 9,999 don't like me, does that mean I'm not good?
Oh.
If half of them like me, am I halfway where I should be? If a bunch of musicians love me, but a bunch of jazz critics said, nah, where am I?
Right.
You know, and then for a while I had that mentality. Every jazz critic who said something bad about me, yeah, I want to meet him. I sure like to punch him in the mouth. I got over all that, you know. Everyone is entitled to his or her opinion. And I just hope that enough folks like me that I can get over, get across.
Yeah.
And it's come to the point where if enough like me that enable me to pay my bills on time, I'm halfway there.
Right. Did you enjoy your 10 years almost as directing the Basie Orchestra? Did you enjoy being in a position of leader and the business end of things that must have been involved in that?
Well, I enjoyed being the leader of the Basie Orchestra. I didn't have to be bothered with the business end of things. I just collected a salary like everyone else. And I didn't have to pay the guys off. And I didn't have to. One thing I had to deal with was people who came to me and said, man, I need a raise. Can you get me a raise? And I dealt with the administration about that and was either accepted or rejected.
Yeah. So they had a whole, the Basie organization was a booking agent in itself.
Yes.
And managed the day-to-day operations.
Right. I didn't have to have anything to do with bookings or the business, and rightly so, because as a businessman, that's why Cecilia Foster does all my business. And whatever success I enjoy, thanks to her.
Well, that's a good pairing then.
Yeah, we got a beautiful partnership.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that she's very professional, by the way.
Yes, yes. And
it's good.
You're not alone in that attestation. But as the leader of the Basie Orchestra, I enjoyed standing in front of a quality group every night and hearing this music coming back at me played so wonderfully, so beautifully. That was the best part of it. Being on stage with all those great musicians. Some of them not, you know, like no names, but everybody's there for all he's worth.
Yeah.
And that's the best part of it. The worst part of it was what I referred to as the war going on in the back streets of Basie land, which meant the war between the old heads who said, all we want to hear is old Basie music. Basically, April in Paris, Corner Pocket, Whirlybird, Little Darling, Shiny Stockings, Molten Swing, and a few others. And that's it. In this corner were the people who wanted to see us move on. Yeah, add to the book. Don't just play that old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some critics I really appreciate because they said, as the new leader of the Count Basie Orchestra, Frank Foster is not merely sticking to the old stuff. He's constantly adding to the new stuff, showing his creativity and his forward-looking leadership. And they look forward to hearing what's going to come out now, you know. Others said, well, this new stuff doesn't sound like Basie.
Mm-hmm.
And they just need to stick to what Basie is known for.
Where did the management stand on that issue?
Well, the management was somewhere in between the two sides. The management wanted me to play mostly what the band had been known for, but was encouraging as far as new material. And when they saw where my head was at, in other words, when they saw that I wanted to, I had a mentality or a slogan of I didn't want to bring anything new into the book that Basie himself wouldn't have liked.
Uh-huh.
That's how I started off. And then I began to get experimental and want to branch out.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that cue from the old man now, because the old man, he had a experimental nature. See, a lot of people don't know that Basie was fairly progressive. He always welcomed something new as long as it swung and laid right, you know. And he even told me something he wanted me to do that seemed totally out of context with what the Basie band was about. But it was just a new little gimmick that would have attracted some more attention. And it would still been musical, but it would have been a shock to some Basie fans to witness this. And it was like something that would have been a big surprise where you'd think a song was over, and then suddenly we'd go into something else that sounded utterly crazy. Now this came from the old man himself, that he wanted me to do this. I never got a chance to implement it.
No.
And I was out of the band, and then he passed away before I could even put it together for the band as an outside arranger. A lot of people weren't aware of Basie's own progressive attitude. As long as you gave him a few open spaces to tinkle in, and as long as it swung, you could do what you wanted musically, you know, and always bring it back home. So I came in with this attitude of I don't want to do anything that the old man wouldn't have liked. And then it got so good, and I realized the quality of these musicians was, you know, this high level of musical quality in the band. So I started just branching out a little. And I ran into a brick wall of resistance from critics and some people, because I was so inspired by the quality of the band. And my wife even remarked, you seem to be on a roll here lately. You know, you seem to be super motivated. I said, yeah, well, these guys are playing so good. I want to. You know, I was writing in airports and hotel rooms, writing on the bus, writing in the bathroom, writing everywhere, and bringing it in. The cats were saying, yeah, Foster, this is happening. And then we had one old stick in the mud who shall remain nameless, who would say, nah, this is not Basie. That's not Basie. And
we've had quite a list of those shall remain nameless guys.
Yeah, and they're going to continue to remain nameless.
Yeah, okay.
Because if I ever run into them, I hope I'm driving a Mack truck.
Okay.
But I don't want to expose them to the public.
Right, I understand. Well, you've had a great career. We're running up against our next business here. I wanted to do something quickly with you and kind of test your musical
Oh boy.
memory, if I could. And just tell me if you recall.
Sounds like Brotherly Shove.
You got it, all right?
That's the 3 tenor battle between Frank West, Billy Mitchell, and myself.
Man, that was a mouthful, too. A lot of notes in there.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
looked like you were getting your bebop thing in there. I
That's
think.
right, yeah.
This was from an album that was all your own tunes, right?
I think so,
It's called
yeah.
Easin' It, I believe.
Easin' It, yeah.
Yeah. That must have been quite a nice thing to be able to do, was have an album with...
Well, I approached the old man and I said, Basie, I like to do an album all on my own. So he said, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I said, write it, you know. So I wrote it. And Teddy Reed, the late Teddy Reed, who was the A&R man for Rowe Records, he was, a lot of people didn't like him, but I thought he was wonderful. You know, he was encouraging, you know. He said, yeah, let's do this thing. All you got to do is write the music.
Uh-huh.
So
Let me...
when I had finally got enough music together for one album, because Neil Hefti had done his thing, Quincy had done his thing, Benny Carter had done his thing, Billy Byers, about 6 or 7 guys had
Yeah.
complete albums of their own, all their own arrangements. And so I said, well, hey. Then I even went a step further and I said, Basie, let me publish some of my own songs. He said, go ahead, well. So I gave half of them to Diane Basie Music, and the other half I published myself
All right.
with Frank Foster Music.
Yeah.
Yes. Hey. This was a trend that started while I was a member of the Basie Orchestra that I wasn't aware of, being off the beaten path, where a lot of young musicians wanted to control their product, and they wouldn't give the recording companies the publishing rights.
Yeah.
And so here I come, Johnny come lately. Oh yeah, guys are controlling their own product. Yeah, I like that. Let me get on to that.
Yeah. Let me try this one on you.
Okay.
This is...
I just know you're gonna stump it. There was 2 tenor saxophones, 2 trombones, Frank West and myself, Henry Cochran, Benny Powell, in an album called No Count Basie, or Frank East, North,
There
West,
you
South,
go.
North,
Yeah,
East,
but what
South,
was the
West.
date?
What was the date? Why'd you ask me that? It was around 1956, I think.
Yes, it was. In 56, you were exactly right.
Oh.
Nice little small group, mostly Basie members.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Here's one more for you.
That, by the way, was based on the harmonic structure of Sweet Georgia Brown.
Oh, no kidding. Just borrowing those classic structures.
Right. It's got to be with Elvin Jones.
Yeah.
And I was playing alto clarinet.
Alto clarinet.
And a lot of people said, yeah, you play bass clarinet. And I said, and I just go along with it,
Yeah.
But that was an E-flat alto clarinet. I don't know the name of I think it was It was like, at this point in time, or
Who's Afraid?
Who's Afraid of
Who's
Frank
Afraid?
Wolf? Yeah, that's what it was supposed to be. Who's Afraid of Frank Wolf?
Oh,
But
yeah, they just put on the record, it just says Who's Afraid.
Yeah, because they didn't think it was feasible that we put the whole title on there for some reason or
Yeah.
other.
Did you like playing with Elvin?
Oh, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. Quite a powerhouse.
Oh yeah, we had some time. If I didn't get enough playing and improvising with the Basie band, I sure made up for it with Elvin.
I guess so, yeah. You had the liberty to play as long as you wanted.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And as long as you could last, he could last longer.
Wow. Well, this has really been great. You know, I almost feel like somewhere down the line we have to do part 3.
Well, I'd love to.
You got an awful lot to say. We didn't get too much into. I know you've got some well thought out opinions on the current state of music.
Yes.
And just show me that you had a gesture you made when you were talking about smooth jazz, as you put it.
Yeah.
Remember what it was this morning? I think you went.
Oh yeah, it's so light as a feather jazz.
Right.
You could put it in the palm of your hand, just blow it away.
Is there any racial disharmony in the jazz scene these days that you've noticed?
Well, sorrowfully enough, it mostly involves the opinions of some black musicians about white musicians in general. They may hold a resentment for the fact that in so many of the jazz clubs, we're seeing names that we never heard of before, and they're mostly white. I'll just make up a name, a fictional name, the Ron Brokowski Quintet.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, well, who the heck is Ron Brokowski? Where did he come from? How come I never heard of him? And people who've been around a while and maybe not as successful as they'd like to be are kind of resentful of these young upstarts who are getting all the opportunities. And that's really unfortunate, because I think too many of us who have this sour grape attitude or our own undoing, you know. It's not the fault of the club owners or the promoters or the producers or the record company executives that we can't get a break. Sometimes our own bitterness and our own hatred and racial animosity might be constructing the wall that keeps us from getting where we need to be, worrying about somebody else's success. And it also hurts me to, it disturbs me to see somebody of my race talking about somebody white and saying, oh man, he can't play, never could, when this person they're talking about is a monster. Which indicates to me that you don't have to be of any particular racial persuasion to be good at jazz. You know, all that stuff about, this is our music, nobody can play this music but us. Forget it. Anybody, I mean, not anybody individually. You know, I don't think every person born into this world is a jazz musician.
Right.
And I don't agree with the somebody's got something out that says everybody can improvise. I don't go with
Oh,
that.
that's right. There's a series. Anybody
Yeah.
can improvise.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to that. But, you know, it's an individual thing. It's not necessarily it's not a racial thing. We have such a melting pot here to we're all into each other's culture. Okay, I contend that jazz was born in America as a result of the black experience. Now, nobody in the world could ever convince me that that isn't true. Mm-hmm. Okay? But now, as I said before, we got this melting pot where we're all into each other's culture. We can emulate one another, and we can relate to one another. And talent wasn't just given to whites or blacks or Latinos or Asiatics or whatever. Every racial, ethnic group has talent. And all God's children got rhythm. Some more than others. Look, man, I know some black folks who can't clap on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know some folks that can't do this. 1, 2, 3. On the other hand, I know some white folks every time will say, and vice versa, you know.
Yeah.
So we've all got talented people, and we've all got some no talented people.
Yeah.
Every ethnic and racial group has somebody blowing a horn that should put it down and forget and be a plumber or a postman or something.
Right.
But when I hear somebody who's not black perform on an instrument and that person is good, they're good, regardless of what somebody else black might say. Oh, he can't play, she can't play. And it hurt me years ago. I had one of my trumpet players. Do you know, are you familiar with Lou Soloff?
Certainly.
Well, this guy just put Lou Soloff in the garbage can. He can't play. He never could. And Lou Soloff is a monster. Lou Soloff, he can play anything. He can play jazz. He can play lead trumpet. He can play in a section. He can, you know, he can just do anything that's necessary for a jazz trumpeter to do. Big band, small group, whatever. So when one of us can do it, give us the credit. When one of them can do it, give them the credit. It ain't about, you know, I don't feel threatened by anybody. Mm-hmm. If you can play and you're white, great. Let's play together.
All right.
If you can't play and you're white,
go play with someone else.
Yeah. If you can't play and you're black, get out of here.
Go play with that white guy who can't play.
Yeah.
Well, this has really been a great pleasure for me, and I want to thank you for sharing your sentiments, and you're very well spoken about your opinions.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for all the great music over the years.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you on the campus.
Pleasure to be here.
And let's go to dinner.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good. Come on.